Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now we introduce our guest and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. The understanding of the law and the trial process, as well as the relationship between the police department and the court, plays a crucial role in the successful prosecution in a criminal trial. Today we'll look at the interaction of these two departments with our guest, the Honorable Lorraine Miller, Supreme Court Justice, Kings and Richmond Counties. And also we have with us Chief Tosano Simonetti, Commanding Officer of the Criminal Justice Bureau, a part of the New York City Police Department. Hello, Judge Miller. Hello, Chief Simonetti. Chief, can you tell us basically what does your department do, in a nutshell?
Basically, I'm responsible for liaisoning with all the other components in the criminal justice system. And that's the District Attorney's Office, the Administrative Judges, the Office of Court Administration, the Criminal Justice Agency, and Department of Corrections. Basically, I interrelate with these people to make sure that the arrest to arraignment process kind of moves in a nice, smooth, and orderly fashion.
Okay, Judge. Well, I know you sit in the criminal justice system every day. Judge Miller, how's he doing?
I've never heard of him before. I never knew the Bureau existed before. How nice to meet you. You mean I can call you now to find out why things aren't moving nicely and smoothly?
Absolutely.
Well, you'll have to give me your phone number.
Absolutely. Why not call? Everybody else does so.
Well, I think you're the best kept secret in the whole system. Because as it is now, I've gotten off the bench and called the police commissioner and said, where is Officer so-and-so? Where is, well, you mean he's not there? We don't know where he is. But you go ahead, sir. I didn't mean to interrupt.
But, well, let's take that for example. If an officer has to attend a trial, is that part of your department?
Yes.
And how do you go about, what happens if an officer doesn't show up?
Well, let me just first tell you how the system works.
Okay, good.
Ideally, the system should work, and by the way, we're not without sin. You know, many times the officer doesn't show up, but we look at every case where officers don't make non-appearance cases. But normally, in the course of events, what happens is the district attorneys, the assistant district attorneys, contact our appearance control unit in each of the boroughs, and they will tell them that an officer is required, whether it be to testify at a grand jury hearing, whether it be to appear at a trial is in session, whether it is to come down and talk to a district attorney for trial preparation prior to going into a grand jury, whether to talk about the evidence in a case, whatever it may be regarding a particular case. Our appearance control unit now reaches out to the command where that officer is assigned and directs them to send that officer down. But before they do that, they ask, how is the officer working on that particular day? If it's the officer's regular day off, we become very paranoid, by the way, about overtime. So what we do is we request from the assistant district attorney that they adjourn that case to another date so we don't have to bring the officer in on a regular day off.
Well, what happens if the defendant is incarcerated during that time?
There are certain cases where where the district attorney tells us it's an absolute must appear. That is when, normally in a jail case, where the defendant is incarcerated, and then the officer must appear, and then he does that on an overtime basis. We bring him in on an overtime basis, and he appears at court and does whatever it has to be done. Or goes, we also, with the district attorneys are required by law to indict people, get people before the grand jury in 144 hours. So under those cases where we're coming close to that limitation, the officer also is required to appear.
Judge Miller, how do you find it when the officers do appear? Are they prepared? In your court, what's your opinion?
Well, before I answer that, I'd like to back up, if I may. I know it's not responsive to your question, but I'd like to comment about appearance control and officers not showing up. Chief, one of the most frustrating things, and it happened today on a narcotics case, sale, a notice was put into appearance control, and ostensibly it was forwarded to the precinct. No officer. I had to adjourn the case. Now, I have 60 jurors sitting and waiting to be impaneled. I have other witnesses. I wasted the whole day because the officer didn't appear. And sometimes, because of their shifts, they're not due to appear for 48 hours. So that the first notification that that officer will get is at 4 o'clock tomorrow. 2 days gone. Now, there's something wrong, it seems to me, with this system. It's the most frustrating in the world. And if he's on vacation, well, forget it. When you say tell the DA to adjourn the case, these cases, many of them are 2 years old, with incarcerated defendants. Why don't police officers, A, live in the city, B, make their telephone numbers available? Do you know I can't? I'm a Supreme Court judge. I'm not about to assault a policeman. Why can't I get his phone number so that I can call him at home and say, officer, we need you, come on in?
Chief, how do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I agree with you that, and I happen to agree with the what the mayor is attempting to do, and that is to get the Lions law back and get policemen to live in the city. I feel that's my own personal view, by the way, that if a police officer lives in this city, he's going to have a vested interest in what he does, and I think it would better serve the people of the city of New York. We are bound by contracts with police officers, Judge. And it's not simply me giving you some officer's telephone number, you can call them at home. Interesting that you brought up this issue, because just last week we had our Criminal Justice Coordinating Council meeting, and I meet with each of the administrative judges in each of the boroughs. And last week we had our meeting with Judge Yoswine in Brooklyn. And right near the end of the meeting, the judge asked the same question. He wanted to know how come police officers are not appearing, particularly at trial, when all the things that you just described, and he says, and then the cop doesn't show up, and we have to, the DA is ready, the defense attorney's ready, everybody's ready, and the officer doesn't show up. Well, we had a discussion with the judge, and I can show you very clearly, particularly in Kings County, where we have, what's happened in this particular matter is that's called a short notification. In other words, we don't get a notification until the night before or 2 days before, and it's possible that the officer is on his 2 regular days off. Virtually impossible to reach him. And with short notifications, it's virtually impossible to reach a police officer to tell him to go to court the next day. What we normally request from the district attorneys, at least give us 4 days advance notice. What that really does, you tell us you want a police officer on a particular day. We reach out for the officer. If we find out it's his day off, as I was describing before, we get back to the district attorney. We say, Mr. and Mrs. District Attorney, our cop is on his day off. Can you do something with that? If you can't, at least we have time to notify that officer.
Judge, what happens if this happens 1, 2, 3 times in the same case?
It's happened. Not only, occasionally, it happens frequently.
Can the defense attorney then petition the court to dismiss the case for lack of prosecution?
You can, but, I'm trying major felony cases, and I must admit to you, I'm not about to dismiss a homicide case because some policeman went fishing. And there seems to be a rash of fishing in your department. What goes on? I mean, they're all out fishing. At least that's the excuse I get. I think you're oversimplifying it, Chief. I really do.
Ronnie, going to the other question that I asked, once they get to court, are they prepared?
No, they are not prepared. I feel very sorry for the young policeman. And, while I have great admiration for the mayor, and I think he's got a terrible job, I really don't understand what good it's going to do. And this is one of my pet peeves, when I heard that the new policemen were going to, well, I don't know about new, but when policemen are going to be assigned to traffic duty, because their presence is going to make a big difference. Flatbush Avenue has never been in worse shape since they put a policeman on the corner directing traffic. We did better without him.
When you say the police officer is unprepared, can you give us an example of that?
They don't bring their memo books, number one. They don't make proper entries. They don't bring the vouchered, if they did voucher, the gun, the knife. I just had 2 acquittals in
Now this is a major case.
Homicide case. When I asked the jury afterwards, and I sometimes do, where there's an acquittal, I will speak to the jury afterwards. They want to know, where's the gun? It's almost like, where's the beef from the commercial?
Yes.
Where's the gun and where's the knife?
Chief Simonetti, can you respond to that?
And the DA said it was a logistical problem. I don't know what that meant. Do you?
Well, let me say this to you. It's not only a police officer who must be prepared. It's the district attorney who must prep that police officer prior to that trial and make sure, because he or she is the person that is going to be prosecuting that case.
I think we're passing the buck, Chief.
No, I'm not passing
Chief,
it.
we're passing the buck.
I'm not into finger pointing, but
Okay.
just let me describe the way the process should be working.
No, you know, forgive me, but I want to stay right where
Okay,
it's at.
fine.
Or every officer should be trained, and I've lectured at the police academy.
Fine.
And a lot of those poor young cops tell me that the only time they got any instruction about what to do when they come into court
Right.
is the day that I was up there. And I met several of them out in Borough Park afterwards, and they told me this. I can't believe that an officer shouldn't know, as part of his training, when you go to court, pick up the vouchered material. Or a lot of them don't voucher it. They throw things away. And when they're asked, where's the
That's
bag?
evidence we're talking about now.
Evidence. Yeah. How could you go to trial and not have the evidence with you? You know? Now, when you say the DA should tell them that,
Well-
I say that it's more basic than that. They have to learn, when they come into court, dress appropriately. Don't wear a T-shirt, as one officer did, that said, had an electric chair on it, and it said regular or crispy underneath it. Could you believe this? Another one came in with his hunting underwear shirt
You mean this is to testify?
to testify. I had to send him home.
Are these undercover officers that come in like this? Chief, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think I'd like to go back a little bit and really respond to the other issue first, and then I'll get back to this whole...
This is a little glaring. I mean,
Okay.
let's just answer this question,
Let
if
me
you
tell
can.
you this. Absolutely.
Okay.
We have rules in place that very carefully describe that when an officer goes to testify at a trial, he should be appropriately dressed, attired.
Of course.
Okay, that's very clear. You know,
Whether he's undercover or not undercover, he should be appropriately addressed.
right. Well, the undercovers are another issue because, their identity...
I'm sorry, I mean plain clothes.
Yes.
Plain clothes.
Yeah, the detectives or as opposed to uniform officers. Absolutely, and I agree with you 100%. And police officers should not be coming into your courtroom looking like that. I mean, when I look at it, it bothers me too. And let me tell you, when I walk through a courtroom and I see that kind of behavior, and I see people dressed like that, I personally tell people. But there are rules in place for that. Do we catch them all? No. Some of them fall through the cracks, absolutely. But just let me tell you this regarding, let's get back to people testifying. All evidence should be vouched. I mean, I can't see in a major felony case, particularly in a homicide case, that evidence is not getting vouched. And the reason why I say that is because when we get a homicide, it's not just the uniformed people that are involved in the investigation, as you're well aware of. I mean, the detectives get involved right away. Now, the homicide investigators are usually your most seasoned investigators. And then crime scene gets involved. And I can tell you, these people are so meticulous in picking up evidence.
Some of them are excellent.
They pick
Some
up
of them are
every little
excellent.
scrap. And if they don't need it later on, then you can discard it. But you don't know what could be valuable for that particular case. So most things are gathered as evidence. But getting back to cops testifying, police officers testifying, when they go down and that person gets indicted, and then prior to going to trial, there should be consultation with the district attorneys. And they should sit down and discuss that particular
Are you
thing.
saying it's the district attorney's
No,
fault?
absolutely
We have to take a
not.
break now, but we're certainly going to continue this right after the break. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
Every year, thousands of people are killed with a frying pan. Reduce your intake of high-fat fried foods and help reduce your risk of cancer and heart disease. For a free booklet on low-fat eating, call 1-800-EAT-LEAN.
I was going to take a job with an engineering firm in New York. I got a better offer. I'm building schools overseas with the Peace Corps. The pace is a little slower than New York, but here I'm getting grassroots experience I couldn't get anywhere else. The way I look at it, the world can wait 2 years for another 40-story smoked glass high-rise.
Peace Corps, the toughest job you'll ever love.
I don't know if you'll remember me, but I'll never forget you. I'm Mr. Signorelli's daughter. I didn't think about what would happen if he went into cardiac arrest. I didn't realize that at 6 a.m., a nurse would call the shots and save his life.
If you have the smarts and the guts to study biology, chemistry, anatomy, and psychology, call 1-800-962-NURSE. If caring were enough, anyone could be a nurse.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Today's topic is we're discussing the relationship between the court system and the New York City Police Department. Our guests are the Honorable Judge Lorraine Miller. Judge Miller is sitting in Kings County and Richmond County. And Chief Simonetti of the New York City Police Department. Chief, right before the break, we were discussing Judge Miller's position where she was talking about police officers coming in on felony cases, on homicide cases, wearing T-shirts. And in one instance, you mentioned about a T-shirt with an electric chair on it, saying with a Burt and Crispy. Also about
Regular and crispy.
Regular and crispy. Also about police officers coming in unprepared on felony cases, and of course you were responding to it. Well, you can certainly continue.
Yep. Well, if someone comes in looking like that, that's unexcusable. And if it's brought to our attention, I can tell you, the matter is looked at, and in many cases, disciplinary action is taken.
How is it regulated? Is it
We have supervisors who are assigned
in
to
the court in the courthouse? I see.
who are assigned to a court section, which means we have a supervisor down at 120 Skimmerhorn Street. We have a supervisor down at Adams Street in the Supreme Court part of the in the Supreme Court end of the court system in Brooklyn. And one of her responsibilities is to make sure that police officers show up. Do some slip by? Sure, they slip by, but it's unexcusable.
Chief, I know your division is also responsible and head of the arrest to arraignment part.
Yes.
Can you discuss that?
Yes.
What is that?
Well, just recently, arrest to arraignment means from the time someone gets arrested to the time he's brought before a judge for the first time to be arraigned. We talk about the arrest to arraignment time. Recently, there was a court decision that came out of the appellate division of the state court system that said that we must arraign some people within 24 hours, both felonies and misdemeanors.
Now, we're talking about people who are incarcerated, jail cases.
Jail cases.
Okay.
That we must get them arraigned within 24 hours. All right.
And if you don't?
Well, if we don't, we haven't gone before a judge yet. We get served, legal aid has served us in the past with writs of habeas corpus. And in the past, prior to the decision, we went up to Part 50 in Manhattan, and that's the Supreme Court part. We spoke to the judge, and we have to explain each and every prisoner that's in the system more than 24 hours.
In your experience, how long does this time take from the time you're arrested before you actually see a judge for the first time?
Well, let me say this to you. The arrest to arraignment times have gone down significantly since the first of the year. We went from 50 hours on average down to 32 hours on average.
50
In which
hours?
county?
In all counties. In all counties right now, we're doing 32 hours on average on arrest to arraignment.
Judge, is that
All
in your
prisoners.
experience?
Of all prisoners.
Judge?
Well,
Judge
I
Miller?
don't really sit in arraignments, so I can't tell you that except an occasional stint in arraignment part in Kings County. And judging by the looks of some of the people that were brought before me, they had been in an awfully long time. I sat in lobster shift, though, not too long ago.
What is lobster shift?
1 in the morning till 9 in the morning
Right.
in Manhattan. And I had to get up and off the bench and go in the back and say to the sergeant, police sergeant, if you will, who was reading a certain newspaper called Newsday, and I said, why aren't these people being brought in before the court? And she said, well, the van hasn't come over. The van was sitting outside the courthouse for an hour and a half because there was some snafu between the police department and corrections
Chief, you're shaking your head.
And I sat there doing nothing at 3 o'clock in the morning because somebody there wasn't anybody there to coordinate, so I don't know who these people are that you're talking about.
What
that
takes
coordinate all of this.
32 hours? What takes 48 or 50 hours for a person who's arrested, and I assume they could be arrested on a simple assault charge, or maybe an altercation because of a traffic matter with a police officer or something.
It could be anything.
And what takes almost 2 days or 3 days to
Provided
before
the
you come before a
arrest
judge?
goes online.
Yes,
If the arrest doesn't go online, and we have alternatives to putting people
but
online.
let's assume they're online.
If they go online, first of all, just let me explain this process to you, because it's not as simple as one may be led to
Okay.
believe. It's a very complex process. Person gets arrested, he's brought to a station house. And I can give you the average times, by the way, citywide. He's brought to a station house where the preliminary processing is done for that arrest. Preliminary processing includes doing an online booking worksheet, taking the defendant's prints on 3 sets of cards, city, state, and a federal card, vouchering any property that may be held as evidence, preparing the complaint report, and basically, in most uncomplicated arrests, that's about the extent of the processing at the station house. That process takes upwards of 2.5 to 3 hours on average,
Then what happens?
citywide. Then the officer is transported from the station house down to the
You
central...
say the officer, you mean the defendant?
The defendant, along with the
So
officer...
the officer's been waiting there these 2.5 hours as well?
The officer's preparing all his paperwork.
see, okay.
As it takes him on average 2.5 hours to get all his paperwork done at the precinct. He's then transported down to central booking. We have central booking locations in each of the boroughs, in each of the 5 boroughs. He's brought there, the prisoner is lodged there, the officer gives his worksheet to the processing people. They check to make sure that the fingerprints are readable, because they're going to be sent to Albany, so we can get a rap sheet back. That's a person's previous criminal history sheet back. And also, the supervising officer at the central booking locations makes sure that the prisoner's physical condition is okay, that he doesn't require any hospital care, any medical treatment. Prisoner goes into a cell, the officer completes his processing.
How many other prisoners are in the cell?
Well, it depends.
Could be 100.
In Manhattan Central Booking, the large holding area, as we're processing, could be upwards of 100 people.
Well, could you put an 18-year-old boy who's never been in the system because of a minor matter that an arrest was made into one of these cells?
Yes. I mean, if you ask me, can we? Yes.
And do you?
Is there discretion exercised? Absolutely. There are certain prisoners who must be isolated from other prisoners.
Such as?
People who have contagious diseases, people who have AIDS, homosexuals, and juveniles must be segregated. But juveniles, our definition is people under 16 years of age, must be segregated. And naturally, females are separated from males. And so, in response to your question, can we put an 18-year-old who's been locked up for the first time, put online, can we put him in the cell? And the answer is yes.
Chief, can I just interrupt for a minute? You mentioned all this paperwork stuff. I'm concerned from my point of view, sitting on the bench. Who instructs them? Who tells them what goes into this paperwork? I've seen so many cases go down the tubes because of sloppy paperwork. For example, a prisoner made or a defendant made a statement. How does it happen that the officer didn't write it down in his report? And when he's asked that by a smart defense lawyer doing his job, saying, well, officer, didn't you think that was important that the defendant made a statement to you? Well, yes, I did. Well, why isn't it in the piece of... Who teaches these officers? What's the point of hiring 7,500 new police officers if they're going to get the kind of training that I have seen in the court, and I've been on the bench now 14 years?
I've been in this police department 36 years, and I can tell you, unequivocally, we have the best trained police officers in the country, and I think I would be safe in saying in the entire world.
Now you know why people are moving out of this city.
The training that's given to our people, there's nowhere else in this country.
Are you talking about 6 months at the academy?
Chief,
Yes.
basically,
Yes.
I think what the Judge Miller, the point she's making is that there may be criminals actually going free because of
Sloppy paperwork.
because of that. And of course, that's
Credibility is so much at issue.
All our citizens, and yourself included, of course, don't want a criminal.
Have cases been lost on technicalities from people concerned in the whole system? Absolutely. They have been lost. What are our people instructed in? If a person even makes an extemporaneous statement, certainly that officer should record that either in his memo book. The detectives are very carefully, they do it daily, so they know to put it on what we call a DD5.
Chief Simonetti, without getting technical, we only have a few moments left. Judge, what do you see is happening? You know, here in New York City, everybody is a little concerned or a lot concerned. You can't pick up the newspaper without reading about somebody who wasn't even involved in a crime being shot on the street, or there was a district attorney in the Bronx County who was getting a cup of coffee, who was killed getting a cup of coffee by something he was not even involved in. What is your perception of the system?
I'm concerned that police really should serve two functions. One is deterrence, and one is enforcement. And I think that, and I really love a lot of the cops. I really do. They're good people. But I feel sorry because I think they're not being trained. Now, maybe that's not your department, Chief, but I'm worried, really worried, about 7,500 new police officers getting the kind of training. And I go around to police stations at 7 o'clock in the morning on my own time at roll call. And only recently at the 90th Precinct in Kings, they said, "We're so glad you came, because nobody tells us these things."
Chief, the ball is now in your court. What's being done to train the police officers?
Well, you know, in addition to our recruit training, which takes place prior to an officer going out on the street, and I started to tell you before, that's the most extensive training given anywhere.
But Judge Miller is saying in her experience it's not sufficient.
Well, I can only give you as basis of comparison with other departments.
No, then what are you doing about continuing education?
Okay, fine. Let me tell you about, we have in-service training. That takes place when an officer is assigned to a command. We have in-service training that takes place. The judge just described a training that we call sensitivity training. In other words, we invite people from the community, from all walks of life, to come in and talk to our cops and dialogue with our cops, really, and hoping, and I'm glad to hear that you went to the 9-0 precinct in Brooklyn.
Oh, I've gone to virtually every precinct.
That's great.
Chief Simonetti, we're coming to a close. Judge Lorraine Miller, thank you very much for appearing on Law Line. Thank you both very much for a very interesting show. We're certainly going to have you back.
Thank you for having us.
So, all too
Thank
short.
you, Al.
And as always, this is Alan Schnorman, and thank you for watching Law Line.
You have been watching Law Line with your host, New York trial attorney, author and lecturer, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions or comments about this week's program, please write to Law Line, 27th floor, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005.